So this is a fun little project that you can do in an afternoon, and this is an idea I got off one of my students 5 years ago now, Nathan. He went on to do an electrical engineering course at Huddersfield University, but 5 years ago he brought one of these into class with him to show me. He'd picked it up off eBay, and at the time these were going for £16.50 and free shipping from a seller here in the UK. And we took it apart in class and had a look at it, and it really is well constructed inside here. It's got quality parts, the soldering is spot on. I purchased this one that I've got here from the same seller straight away. He sold out pretty quickly, and I have got one of these recently, well, probably a couple of years ago now, that looked exactly the same, but on the inside it was really was a dog's dinner when you compare it to this. And this used to be on the right hand side of my bench here, and I used to use it virtually every day. I've only recently swapped back over to have the Heiko on the right hand side. But one of the things I didn't like about this, well, one was the soldering iron stand here itself. I replaced the inside of this with a cheap one that had this you know, this metal tubing in here. It just made it a lot better. It was tending to fall out, but I modified that quite early on. But what Nathan did is he got a tin can and he made one of these with the solder scourer inside, so he could clean his soldering iron tip instead of using the sponge in the bath part here. And the tin fits nicely inside this, and you know, I never got round to making one, but that's one of the reasons I'd swapped over. I've had a tabletop one and I've since lost it, so that's the reason, one of the main reasons I swapped over, because I like the Heiko because of that feature. So I thought we'd make one today on the bench. It really is a quick and simple project that you can do. So first of all, you need to find yourself a tin with a diameter that will fit quite nicely inside this well here, and these holders tend to be pretty standard on the cheap Chinese knockoff ones. They tend to all be the same. You can see that I have used a sponge in this in the past. We've got a bit of rusting going on there, but basically this tin here will fit nicely into that there. So now that I've got my tin emptied and cleaned it up a little bit for soldering, you need to measure the height that you want to cut this down to. Now this particular one has got this lip on here, so I don't want it to be too big that I can't fit it underneath there. So if you get yourself a you know, a ruler like this and just measure off. What's nice about these particular tins, it's got these ridges in here, and I know that if I cut on the fifth ridge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I cut it off there, it's just a nice height to fit down underneath this lip of the soldering iron holder here. So that's what I'm going to do. But basically, as I said, all these are the same with these cheap knockoff you know, soldering irons from China, so they're pretty standard. And the ridges in this can also help you to get a nice mark all the way around the can, and if you get it in the indentation, then it also acts as a guide for your Dremel cutter on here. If you measure it off and you get a measurement which is on a peak of one of these ridges, I wouldn't try to cut on that peak. I would make it slightly smaller and go down onto the next ridge, just because it's a lot easier cutting it out with the Dremel. Now for the base, I've just got a lid from a slightly bigger tin can, and what I've done, I've cleaned away some of the paint from this because I've turned it upside down, and this tin can fits nicely in the ridge on this one here. So what I'm going to do is flood solder all inside this ridge here. I've already pre-tinned this edge of the can, and then basically when I've got the solder flooded into there, I can hold it on the top and then just go around with my little blowtorch and just reflow all the solder all the way around here, and that should then make this nice and strongly to this base here, this lid off a larger size tin can. So So I'm basically just using my soldering iron, get some heat in there, and then just flood the solder all the way around here. And you want to use leaded solder for this as well. I am a fan of unleaded solder because basically I've had to use it for years because it's banned in the schools in UK, but I've often found that when you're doing something like this, really you need leaded solder to do it, because the unleaded stuff doesn't seem to work well for an application like this. So now I'm ready to make these two together, and I'm just going to flow the solder, get enough heat in there to get it all flowing. Basically just going to use my blowtorch here. You could probably do this with your soldering iron as well, turned up quite high. And first time I did this, I used a heat brick on the base, but it seemed to draw too much of the heat away. It works better with a couple of pieces of wood, basically one on the top so you don't burn your fingers when the tin heats up, and then one on the bottom just to protect your bench. And I'm not going to try and do all this in one go either. I'm going to flow the solder in this area here, let it cool down, and then turn it around. So now that I've got the base soldered on, I'm just going to cut away the excess with a pair of scissors and then clean it up with a sanding drum on the Dremel tool. So that's the scourer packed in there quite tightly, but basically, you know, if this front piece gets a little bit ruined, covered with too much solder, all you need to do is push it in from this side and then pull it out from the back there. Keep doing that, and basically that way you just rotate your scourer. And it fits nicely into this tray on this cheap soldering iron now. So now I've got my soldering iron and I've got my scourer instead of the sponge and water. Although I will say the sponge and water does have a few benefits over the scourer, especially when you're doing really micro soldering, but for general purpose uses I just use a scourer. And also, if you wanted to make one for your bench, you can angle the tin can like this one here. You could probably add a little bit of foam to the base as well, and possibly some weight on the inside, but really simple design. So a really quick video I thought I'd make because I was making one for myself. Hopefully you know, it's inspired you to make one for yourself, or you just found it entertaining in general. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and hopefully you'll join me on the next one. And an extra little tip that I forgot to mention: if you want to make one that's slightly angled, I've often said that masking tape is probably one of the most useful things you can have. And I've got a roll of masking tape here. I've just suspended it at the minimum depth that I want here with another piece of masking tape, and now what I can do is just draw a line all the way around using the masking tape as a guide, and that way I've got a nice even slice all the way through my baked bean tin that I can just chop away, and I don't have to do any complex measurements or any kind of geometry, any like that, to get it nice and level and flat on the bench.